The storm had rinsed the mountains clean, leaving the world pared to white, pine, and breath. On patrol, the silence hung so complete it felt like a held note, and the radio on my chest seemed rude for being alive. We moved along the ridge line where the wind knifed the snow into waves, and there the first print lay, an oval crater, edges glazed by fresh frost, stride too long for any known thing. Another waited 10 paces ahead, then another, each one deeper, as if the mountain itself had been stepped upon. Curiosity pulled harder than fear until the trail bent toward a stand of black spruce that knew more than we did. We followed, whispering theories we didn't quite believe, until the prints veered to an overhang where the stones seemed carved by weather and older hands. The line ended at a bare slab scribed with a figure whose arms were spears and whose eyes had been drilled out. Snow hissed in the wind. Somewhere close, a twig cracked like a small bone. We both turned, and nothing turned with us. Back at the station, the stove clattered and ticked like nervous bones, while wet gear steamed on nails along the wall. We laid out photographs, ruler marks, and the half-melted cast as if assembling a myth into evidence. Logic demanded footprints belonged to something measurable, but the trail had ended where the stone began. As if the earth had swallowed its maker. The radio muttered dispatch chatter, and between the lines I heard the hush of the ridge again. We spoke in low tones, marking distances and times, yet the numbers felt like offerings that the mountain would not accept. Snow thickened against the windows. When silence returned, it carried a breath too large for the room. The stove's glow dimmed, and the shadows lengthened across the map like antlers reaching. I shut the logbook, and the sound was louder than expected, like a door closing somewhere far outside. Dusk dropped early, thick as wool. We took another run at the ridge before full dark, drawn by the thought that fresh snow might catch a clearer impression. The forest swallowed our beams. The pines fenced the trail with black teeth. For a time we followed our own tracks from earlier, then the path braided into a confusion of windscour and drifts. When the prints reappeared, they were larger, as if the cold had made them swell, or as if the thing had grown between breaths. Each step cratered deeper than our boots could manage, not sinking so much as commanding the snow to part. The trail angled down canyon toward a creek whose ice sang with trapped water. Somewhere ahead, a raven barked and fell silent mid-call. We stopped together, unwilling to go forward, equally unwilling to retreat. The night pressed in close, friendly to something that did not need our light to see. Night finished its descent as we retreated to the valley road. The prints paralleled us now, sometimes crossing, sometimes vanishing into drifts only to appear on the other side of the plowed berm, as if depth meant nothing. A plow truck passed with a roar, scattering sparks where chain met ice. When its taillights shrank, we were alone in the quickening dark again. The moon rose thin and cloud-bitten. Far above, something moved along the ski of an avalanche chute, uphill with a patience that mocked gravity. We watched without speaking until it slipped behind a screen of trees, leaving only a suggestion, a taller darkness among dark. The road bent toward home. With every turn, I felt the trail coiling back, a wire drawing tight from ridge to doorstep, as though we held the other end and had not noticed. At the cabin, the stove took, and the kettle began its soft, forgiving rattle. I shed ice and noise, set the radio on the sill, and let the hush settle. That should have been the end of it. 4 log walls, a locked door, the simple arithmetic of distance. Then the wind fell completely away, and the quiet developed a weight. On the porch, snow shifted with a deliberate sound, not sliding, not settling, placing. A single step creaked the boards, another traced the eave. My breath fogged the window and cleared in a rhythm that suddenly did not match the cadence outside. I lifted the coil of lantern light and saw in the drifts by the woodpile a print larger than the rung of the ladder beside it. The path came from the tree line and ended at my threshold, patient as a question. Something vast exhaled, and the glass tremored in time to it. The road to Timberline climbed in ribs of ice, each switchback a question we could not answer. The homestead sat where the trees thinned and the wind gathered its teeth. A squat house stitched from logs older than the highway. We went because silence had begun to speak too clearly, because the prints had ended on stone as if stone were a mouth. Inside, dried herbs hung like brittle constellations, and the stove sighed with a patient heart. She watched without surprise and told us that some mountains keep accounts, that debts endure when names do not. The walker, she said, learned a shape from those who carved its rest, and took to the snow to remind the living of their share. Footsteps, she warned, are a language. To follow the wrong sentence is to be answered. Outside, gusts raked the roof, and something tapped the eaves with a measured knuckle. When we rose to leave, she pressed a charm into a palm, a ring of sapling twig bound with red thread, and told us to hang it where we wanted the night to end. Back at the station, the radios turned capricious, voices thinning to reeds, and then to breath. Maps lay open like skins, the ridge line a scar we kept touching. We logged distances and times until the numbers throbbed and blurred. Snow marched down from the passes, whitening the world to a single instruction. Listen. On the porch, Powder held the day's story in shallow relief. Boot treads, shovel marks, the drag of a sled. And beyond the step, where no one should have walked, a line of immense ovals curved toward the door, then away, circled like a thought refusing to settle. We followed them to the generator and found the casing raked in 4 precise grooves. More deliberate than animal. The lights browned and returned, as if considering us. I hung the little charm on a nail above the door. The thread looked minor against all that timber and night, a line sketched on a storm. Yet, for a moment, the air steadied, as if the house had drawn a boundary and the mountain were reading it. Twilight gathered like smoke when he took the snowmobile to check the cameras along the creek. The engine dwindled to a bee in a bottle, and then became the ordinary wind. I worked the radio until the words came back in shreds. Half a call sign, a clipped breath, the click of a throat not ready to speak. Dread is not sudden. It advances with the clock, second hand rasping over teeth. I followed on foot. The machines track a braided scar along the bank. Headlamp glare shattered on hoarfrost. One camera stood twisted on its strap, lens peering at nothing. Another lay face down in the snow, recording the dark. At the bend, the sled idled in a shallow drift, empty, steam pulsing from the muffler like a sleeping animal. There were prints everywhere, our boots, the treads, and that other stride ghosting between, sometimes overlaying, sometimes skipping as if time itself had missed a step. I called his name and heard only distance answer with the sigh of water under ice. The search widened under a sky of hammered tin. I climbed where the creek stitched back into the trees, following signs that weren't signs. A bent sapling shivering without wind. A snag polished at shoulder height, a scatter of twigs arranged like spokes. Farther on, bark carvings appeared, simple lines that resolved, with staring, into the same spear-armed figure from the rock, repeated and deformed as if carved by a hand, learning its own intention. On the snow below, a lanyard lay half swallowed, badge face turned to the sky. I pocketed it, and felt the weight of the plastic like a stone taken from a river, rounded by time, telling nothing and everything. The forest closed in, every trunk a sentinel, and I realized the trail no longer led outward, but in a spiral tightening around an absence. When the wind rose, it did not move the trees so much as move among them, choosing which bough to speak through, which drift to breathe upon, until I understood that we were being herded toward a conclusion the mountain had already drawn. Night met me halfway home and walked the rest of the road beside me, step for step. At the cabin, I lit the lantern and let its circle push back the gloom. a small republic of warmth in a continent of cold. The radio answered once with an open carrier, and then died to a soft, endless hush, like a shell hearing the sea. Snow settled on the roof in patient handfuls. The first thump came from above the porch, a deliberate weight testing boards I knew by sound. Another landed beyond the bedroom, followed by a slide that stopped where eaves met shadow. I set a second chair at the table as if that could balance the room. Outside, the footprints reappeared, crisp crescents climbing the steps and circling the door, lingering at the window where my breath had once fogged the glass. I hung the red thread circle from the curtain rod and watched it turn slowly in the draft. The turning did not frighten me. The pause between turns did. In that stillness, I felt a gaze, not on the house, but inside it. By dawn, the storm had cleared, leaving a stillness that felt rehearsed. I marked a search grid across the map and set out alone. The snow reflected enough light to blind thought. Near the tree line, I found the trail cameras frozen in their loops, batteries full, yet every frame washed white, except one. A blurred figure, taller than the spruces, stride caught mid-motion, impossibly upright. The lens must have twisted, for the image bent around it like glass under heat. I hiked toward the frame's coordinates, counting breaths, steps, heartbeats. The forest thinned, revealing a basin ringed in granite ribs. In its center, a cairn of stones, old enough to carry moss beneath the snow, stood like a vertebra of the world. Around it spiraled those prints, wide, deliberate, tracing a perfect circle. The sun struck the basin and flashed off the ice, blinding for a heartbeat. When sight returned, the circle was unmarred, but one new footprint stood apart, facing outward, as if waiting for me to fill its twin. By midday, I'd reached the north ravine where trees grew twisted from avalanche scars. There, the forest began to change tone. Color drained, sound thickened. My boots sank into snow, softened by melt from somewhere unseen. I heard water under ice, steady as breath, and the faint echo of something dragging a limb. When I knelt, I saw that beneath the top layer of snow ran an older trackway, deeper than the new prints above. A second ghost repeating the first. I dug until fingers brushed bark, not soil. Roots woven into shapes too regular, curves intersecting like ribs. It was no natural lattice. The scent of sap and rot mingled with iron. I backed away, breath shortening, and realized the sound of dragging had ceased. For a moment, silence took on the form of attention, and I felt the weight of an unseen listener, trying to remember what speech once was. Toward evening, I found his glove nailed to a trunk by a splinter of bone, the badge still in its palm. The forest had grown too quiet for the hour. I followed a slope downward, where frost feathers sparkled, and air grew warm enough to smell pine sap again. Beneath a rock shelf, the snow had melted into a pocket of exposed soil, wet and black. There lay his pack, upright, straps buckled as if worn by the ground itself. The prints circled here too, overlapping in chaotic spirals, sometimes human, sometimes broader, the edges bearing claw marks that cut clean through the ice. In the center was a depression shaped like a man lying down, arms at his sides, the snow over it slightly sunken as though something heavy had melted through and then refrozen. I called once, quietly, then louder. The echo that came back used my voice and added a breath at the end that wasn't mine. The return trek blurred into fragments of sky and breathing. I could no longer tell if the prints led or followed, only that each time I stopped, another appeared beyond the last, closing the distance by patience rather than speed. The mountains no longer seemed still. Ridges shifted subtly when not looked at. Snow cornices flexed like muscle. Near the pass, dusk lifted a veil of mist, and through it I saw a form between trunks, shoulders spanning 2 tree widths, head tilting as though curious, eyes catching no light yet marking direction. It did not advance. It waited for acknowledgement. And when I lowered my gaze in involuntary submission, the shape dissolved into the mist, as if recognition were permission to vanish. I walked faster downhill, unable to unsee the proportions burned onto the inside of my eyelids. The forest exhaled as though satisfied, and every instinct knew the hunt had reversed course. Dark fell before I reached home, but the cabin lamp still burned, though I hadn't left them on. Inside, warmth lingered, metallic and foreign. The kettle steamed, whistling softly, lid rattling though no fire touched the stove. I approached slowly, lantern shaking. The whistle died without cooling, as if air itself had grown tired of sound. On the table lay my field notebook, opened to a page I hadn't written. A charcoal rubbing of the cairn's spiral, drawn in precise lines, too perfect for gloved hands. Beneath it, a single wet print pressed into the wood grain, deep enough to swell the fibers. The window's frost caught lantern light and shimmered like a veil. Beyond it, the yard was empty. Yet snow cascaded from the roof as though footsteps paced above. I whispered the name I'd never been given permission to say, and from the rafters came a single drop of meltwater landing in rhythm with my heart. The mountain wore a crown of lightning that night. Wind came first, then the kind of silence that preludes a storm's confession. I left the cabin because stillness had become unbearable. My compass spun like a drunk moth, so I followed instinct, the same blind geometry that trees use to find light. Snow drove in sheets, sculpting shapes that seemed to move when unseen. The prints returned within minutes, pacing beside my path, sometimes 2, sometimes 3, across, converging and parting like dancers in ritual. The air thickened with ozone. The forest flickered and strove. Each flash burned an afterimage. The cairn, the glyphs, the hollow where breath had echoed mine. The mountain was calling its witness back. Above tree line, wind peeled away the world, until only rock and the idea of direction remained. Then, between strokes of lightning, I saw a tower, its broken spine jutting from the ridge, older than any survey. Its stones banded by centuries of frost. I went toward it because I no longer believed in choice. The tower greeted me with a hollow note as wind tunneled through its ribs. Inside, ancient steps curled upward into shadow. My lantern threw trembling arcs across walls, scored with carvings half consumed by lichen. Men bowing before a colossal figure whose feet spanned their temples, its hands raised not in blessing but in command. Between lightning flashes, I saw that the carvings changed as I moved. First stone, then almost flesh, as though motion itself had freed them. Each flash drew the figure closer until it filled the stairwell, eyes open, mouth still uncarved. I climbed anyway. At the top, the floor had collapsed, leaving a ring of stones around a hollow shaft descending into the mountain's heart. Snow fell through the open roof, vanishing into the dark like lost seconds. Something rose from that shaft. Heat, breath, maybe memory. It smelled of wet iron and cedar. I whispered my partner's name, and the wind answered in perfect mimicry. I descended the shaft by rope until stone gave way to ice. The chamber opened like a throat, swallowing the light. Frozen columns arched above, refracting lantern fire into blue ghosts. At the center rose a slab, a table or altar, ringed by bones that gleamed like ivory mirrors. On its surface lay something wrapped in hide, the outline unmistakably human but too long, the proportions refusing sense. I stepped closer, and the hide shivered as if exhaling. Beneath it, faint light pulsed, slow as a heartbeat. When I reached out, the air solidified around my wrist. Neither pain nor temperature, only presence. Images crowded my skull. A people kneeling beneath stormlight, carving giants from rock, binding their fear into form. Their debt had waited patiently for remembrance. The light under the hide brightened, and the rope above twitched once, as if something else had begun its descent. The rope jerked again, rhythm steady, descending weight unmistakable. I backed from the altar as snow sifted down the shaft, swirling in miniature cyclones. Then, silence, followed by a sound like a foot pressing into wet earth. The ice floor shuddered, cracking hairline fractures that ran toward me like veins. A shape unfurled from the shaft, taller than memory, shoulders brushing frost columns, eyes level with the ceiling vault. It was neither man nor beast, its skin the color of old ash, veins glowing like molten seams beneath. When it inhaled, frost retreated from its breath. When it exhaled, stalactites grew. It watched me the way storms watch trees, calculating which will break first. My voice failed, words freezing on tongue. I lifted the lantern higher, and in its trembling halo, I saw Elias's badge embedded in its chest, pulsing faintly with each borrowed heartbeat. Lightning found a crack in the mountain and poured itself down the shaft, striking the chamber in a roar that erased thought. The creature convulsed, then straightened, light spilling from its seams like sunrise underwater. I turned and ran, rope burning my palms as I climbed. The tower above screamed with shifting stone. Outside, the storm had become pure white motion, horizonless. Every flash etched the ridge in negative, the tower collapsing behind me like a lung expelling its last breath. I stumbled down slope, half sliding, half falling, the mountain alive beneath. When I looked back, a column of fire and snow rose where the tower had been, swirling into a figure that stepped once, then dissolved into wind. Its echo reached me not through air but through bone, a whisper that wasn't language but meaning. The debt is paid only when remembered. I understood then that escape was not distance but memory, and memory had followed me home once already. The mountains spat me out at dawn. I woke half-buried beside the service road, skin scored by ice and mind hollowed by the storm's last thunder. The tower was gone, the ridge smooth as if carved anew. I trudged back to the cabin on legs that remembered movement before reason. The prints followed again, lighter now, more suggestion than mark, as if shadow itself had taken to walking. Inside, everything smelled of cold iron and smoke. The kettle had boiled dry. The charm above the door was gone, only the nail remained, bent upward. I sat at the table and laid out the notebook. The last page was blackened at the edges, the spiral now complete, closing in on itself like an eye. When I touched it, ash flaked away, revealing wood scored beneath with the same rune that marked the tower's stone. The wind pressed against the walls, rhythmic, deliberate. Something vast was pacing the boundary of the forest again, waiting for the world to remember it properly. I tried to call base, but the line gave only the oceanic hiss of an open world. The radio's static shifted in tone until it almost formed words. My own played backward. Each time I spoke, the echo returned slightly delayed, reshaped, as if learning speech anew. I listed coordinates, weather, damage reports, anything to anchor reason, but the signal refused obedience. Outside, fog crawled through the timber like a tide, erasing distance. Within its folds moved silhouettes, not quite human, not quite air, each echoing the motion of my hand as I lifted it, mirroring gestures a fraction too late. I shut the curtains. The fabric breathed inward once, then stilled. The stove flared and went dark. In the silence that followed, I realized sound had boundaries too, and something was pressing them from the other side. By afternoon, the fog had condensed into snowfall without falling. Flakes hung motionless in the air, suspended by unseen rhythm. I walked the perimeter with rifle slung but useless, boots creaking over crusted drifts that neither broke nor held. The forest breathed with me. When I reached the tree line, I found fresh carvings gouged into bark, all pointing inward, arrows converging on the cabin. Their lines glistened as if bleeding sap anew. I remembered the old woman's words. Footsteps are a language, and understood that these were sentences now finishing themselves. I followed one line until it merged with another, then another, until the trees formed a ring around me. In the snow between them lay a small bundle wrapped in hide. When I unrolled it, my own field badge stared back, its surface pulsing faintly with light beneath the metal. The forest murmured approval, every branch nodding in some invisible wind. I ran without direction and yet found the cabin instantly, as though distance had agreed to forget itself. At dusk, the mountain itself seemed to lean nearer. The horizon folded inward, ridges layered like closing shutters. I could hear rock shifting beneath the snow, the slow respiration of something ancient and deliberate. I built a fire to banish the echo, but flame bent sideways, drawn toward the window. Through the frost I saw footprints forming anew, one by one, circling the cabin at measured pace, each heavier than the last. They did not press down. The snow rose up to meet them, molded by memory rather than mass. The sound was steady, like a heart too large for the body that bore it. I lifted the rifle and aimed where the next step should fall. The trigger broke clean. The echo came late, swallowed by the mountain's reply. Another step, closer, patient, unhurt. Night descended without gradient, absolute as a curtain drawn. I sat at the table with lantern low, listening to the pacing ease into rhythm, the kind that lulls even terror toward trance. Then it stopped. The stillness that followed carried awareness, the way a held breath holds decision. I turned to the window. Frost veiled it like old glass, but through it I saw my own reflection standing outside, identical posture, lantern raised. The figure moved a fraction after I did, a delayed echo of will. Its eyes glowed faint blue, echo of the light beneath the mountain. I realized the mountain's witness had taken my shape, learning the language of debt through mimicry. The reflection lifted its hand in farewell or greeting, and when I blinked, it was gone. Only the prince remained, leading downhill into the dark valley. I understood then that the Watcher no longer followed. It had taught me how to walk in its place. The valley spread before me like a wound stitched with rivers. I left the cabin at first light, following the prints that mirrored my own stride. The forest was silent. No birds, no wind, only the rhythmic whisper of snow falling from itself. The tracks led down through switchbacks and frozen meadows where elk once passed. Now, only the faint shimmer of blue beneath the drifts marked their path. I felt neither hunted nor alone, but accompanied, as if some invisible thread linked my chest to the mountain behind. Each step brought clarity. I was not chasing or fleeing, only tracing a sentence written long before I could read. By the time I reached the timberline, clouds had sunk to earth, and daylight had become a memory of itself. In that half-light, I saw the final ridge, the place where the first footprints had appeared weeks ago, waiting for me to close the circle. By midday, the air had thinned to glass. I found the remnants of the search grid, flags half-buried, markers leaning at drunken angles. Beneath one fluttering scrap of cloth, the snow had hollowed into a pit. I crouched and brushed away the crust to reveal the glint of bone, long polished, almost translucent. It was arranged with intention, each joint aligned toward the mountain's heart. Between ribs gleamed a fragment of mirrored ice reflecting sky and my face inverted within it. I understood then that nothing had been taken from me. It had been lent, memory on loan, awaiting return. The ice cracked under my breath, the reflection shivering apart. Behind me, the sound of another step followed, not echoing but answering. I turned slowly, expecting my double, but found only open air. Yet, The snow carried two sets of fresh prints side by side, keeping time with my heartbeat. The prints guided me through an old burn scar where trees stood like blackened sentinels. The wind carried ash that did not rise from any visible flame. In the center of the clearing waited the cairn again, no longer snow-capped, but bare, stones steaming faintly as if warmed from beneath. On its top lay the badge, the same one I'd found days before, now cool and clean. I reached out, and the earth responded with a low hum that resonated in bone more than ear. The air thickened. Heat coiled through my veins. From the edges of the clearing, silhouettes began to form. Tall, lean, featureless, each made of drifting snow and memory, faces flickering between the living and the lost. They watched, acknowledging continuity. I placed the badge upon the cairn's crown, and for a moment the storm paused, holding its breath. Then the valley answered with a slow, rising exhale, like forgiveness. The hum deepened into music. Subterranean, ancient, patient. I felt the vibration lift the snow around me in small spirals. The figures dissolved one by one into flurries, absorbed by the wind that circled the cairn. A pale glow bloomed from beneath the stones, pulsing like a heartbeat, echoing up through time. My breath joined its rhythm. Each exhale became mist that hung and shimmered before sinking into the light. The mountain seemed to breathe through me, sharing what it remembered of warmth and sorrow. Then, abruptly, silence fell. The glow dimmed until only a single line of blue fire ran between the stones, pointing back toward the ridge. I knew the meaning instinctively. Return. Debt is not erased, only passed along with the telling. I turned uphill, the snow untouched before me, waiting for the first new footprint. Night rose as I climbed. Behind me, the valley glowed faintly with the cairn's dying light, and before me the ridge stood black against a starlit sky. The wind had lost its cruelty. It felt like breath shared among equals. I walked until the first print appeared again. Mine, but not. It waited where all the others had begun, a perfect imprint in frozen snow. I stepped beside it, aligning my stride, and for the first time there was no echo, no delay. Each motion matched exactly. Soundless, seamless. The horizon cracked with dawn. The mountain exhaled a final plume of frost that drifted upward and vanished. When I looked back, the valley was smooth, unmarked, as though the story had folded itself closed. Only my footprints remained, one set where two had been, leading away from memory into light. The sun rose weak and white, washing the peaks in the color of bone. I moved along the ridge with measured steps, every crunch of snow beneath my boots, answering some unseen rhythm that no longer frightened me. The air shimmered faintly, warm despite the frost. Down in the valley, the fog had cleared, revealing only the ghost of the forest beneath its glaze. I reached the site where the first prints had been found. The slab of stone carved with spear-armed figures. Its surface was bare now, washed clean by the storm and time. Yet, when I knelt and brushed away a veil of ice, new carvings gleamed beneath, lines of fresh etching that had not been there before. They depicted a man walking beside the great figure, equal in stride. I felt neither pride nor dread, only a sense that the mountain at last had found the right witness to remember its story. The radio on my belt stirred with static. I raised it to my ear and heard the whisper of wind through a channel no longer connected. Then, faint beneath it, my own voice spoke back, recorded from the night of the storm. The words were simple, almost prayerful. The mountain remembers. I listened to the phrase repeat until it dissolved into soft hum. The mountainside shimmered, light refracting through ice crystals like shattered glass. I realized that every echo, every footprint, every silence had been its way of teaching me how to listen. The voice faded, leaving only the hush of altitude. I clipped the radio back onto my belt, its light blinking once before dying. The world around me seemed vast but comprehensible now, bound not by fear, but by belonging. By midday, the sky had turned clear as glass. I descended through the timberline, each step erasing itself as snow slid gently back into place. At the edge of the forest stood the old woman's homestead, half buried, yet intact. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney as if it had never stopped burning. I knocked, but the door swung inward without sound. The interior was empty. No stove, no herbs, no chair. Only a single twig charm hanging from the ceiling beam, its red thread bright against the gray wood. I reached for it, and it spun once in the draft, then fell apart in my palm, thread unraveling to dust. A calm certainty filled me. She had never been merely a person but another voice of the mountain, a guardian of remembrance. I left the door open behind me, letting the wind claim what remained. I reached the ranger station by evening. The logs smoked faintly. Stove embers long dead, yet the structure stood unharmed. I sat at the desk and opened the logbook. Its pages had refilled themselves, each line written in my own hand, but with words I did not recall. A complete account of the mountain's tale, spanning centuries. It spoke of watchers carved from stone, of humans who had tried to measure awe and were instead measured by it. The final entry ended with my name, followed by a single unfinished line. To be continued by. I dipped the pen, hesitated, and left it blank. The mountain did not need another keeper, only someone willing to remember. I closed the book, sealing the story not with ink, but with breath. Outside, snow began again, soft, forgiving, endless. Later, when night rose over the valley, I stepped outside and looked toward the peaks. The stars burned steady above the ridges, ancient witnesses unchanged by human memory. Somewhere among them lightning flickered once, a silent echo of the storm that had begun it all. I walked a short distance into the snow and turned to face my home. Behind me stretched a single line of footprints, crisp and solitary. The air was still enough to hold them without erasure. For a moment, I imagined another pair beside mine, then realized they were already there. In the rhythm of my pulse, the cadence of the wind. The mountain did not watch me anymore. It walked with me. I raised my lantern toward the horizon, and its light answered, doubling in the distance. The story, I knew, would never end, only change who carried it.